It's a tale I've known as long as I can remember. Atari was on a hot streak. They kept putting out successes and had dominance in the home console market. But then E.T. and the Pac-Man port were released. These, along with other failures, were so bad that it not only kicked Atari out of the game market, but also made the home console market crash. Nobody wanted to release one in the US, and around the same time, a small Japanese company released their first. Nintendo, known for classic arcade games like Donkey Kong, Mario Brothers, arm wrestling, okay, maybe not that one, and before that their toys, was ready to expand into the home console market. This led to them releasing the Famicom in 1983, which just so happened to be around the time when the game crash happened in the US. If Nintendo wanted the system to be a success in the US, they needed to be strategic. They marketed the console like a toy and had a game-playing robot to go along with it. They gave the console a new design to make it look like more of a VHS than a game console. And finally, they released it alongside what may very well be one of the greatest games of all time. This thing is a hunk of junk. Yeah, we all know how the story goes. The NES succeeded and gave Nintendo dominance on the market for a long while. But that was at the time. Has this thing really aged well? No! First of all, the cartridge slot wasn't built to last. And the games, oh boy, the games. Most of the library has aged poorly, and to make things worse, Nintendo keeps re-releasing them. Do you really expect me to enjoy Clu Clu Land? This system may have worked at the time, but it hasn't aged well in the slightest, and most games aren't even close to worth playing anymore. That's what I used to think. But if I ended off there wouldn't be much of a video, would there? What changed my mind? Well, I finally revisited the NES library on Nintendo Switch Online, and it showed me that the NES has some really great games. And most of them share a concept I like to call simplistic complexity. Simplistic complexity is taking a simple idea and doing as much as you possibly can with it, while not exceeding its limits. Or alternatively, taking a complex concept and putting it into a simpler, more accessible format. Both of these define it. It's something that definitely existed before the NES era, and certainly existed after, but the NES really took the philosophy to the next level, and led to part of what we now call Nintendo's charm. Let's get into some examples of that. The Excitebike series is a complete joy. Even though I've played through very few games within it, I still have great memories of the ones I've played. This started with Excitebike 64, but I would later branch out into other games in the series, specifically the NES original. This, and its extended version versus Excitebike, are in my opinion, some of the best NES games. But it feels like they barely get talked about. The gameplay here is incredibly simple. You're a biker and you have to go as fast as possible without burning out. You have strong and weak power for your engine, along with the ability to move between lanes and rotate your bike. That's it. Yet, it feels like there's a genuine difficulty curve here, and this actually does take effort to grasp. For example, I didn't even know using wheelies on the ground was an important mechanic for making jumps until after playing the game for several hours. Now, if I had read the manual, I would have known, but I don't think anyone did that then, nor will anyone really now. Despite the limited control options, Excitebike is able to be charming, challenging, and fun, and a big part of that is its use of simplistic complexity. It takes a simple idea with simple controls and expands upon it with some pretty varied level design for a racing game of the time, along with the game's iconic level creator. If you're going to hop into the series, however, I recommend checking out Versus Excitebike over the original. This one is basically just the original, but with more content, better graphics, and some really good music. Both of these titles are available through Nintendo Switch Online, which is great because for those who have it, it's completely free to hop in and give it a joyride. Going to the complete opposite end of the NES's lifespan, Kirby's Adventure. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a bit of a Kirby fan, so it should be no surprise that I've dabbled in this one. My first experience with it was in Dream Collection for the Wii. I actually got sick around the time I got this collection and was out of school for 3 weeks. During that time I played Kirby's Adventure and thoroughly enjoyed it. I think overall, while it may not be my favorite, it's the Kirby game I've returned to the most. It's short, but not too short. Easy to grasp, yet full of substance. If I want a chill Kirby game that I know I'm gonna love, I'll go to Adventure. While I currently love other Kirby games more, it's hard to deny that without Adventure, the series wouldn't be where it is today. This game introduced so much. The main things you'll notice here that became series staples are Meta Knight and copy abilities. Well, Meta Knight is my least favorite of the main crew, praise Bandana D. Copy abilities are incredibly important to what makes Kirby games feel like Kirby games. They're also a big part of how its design has become one of the best examples of simplistic complexity. In fact, even being categorized as its own design philosophy called Kirbyism. Kirby games are geared towards younger players at entry. You have a lot of abilities that are pretty intuitive to use, and the ability to fly along with it. That's really all you need to know to play the games, but later on in Adventure, things can get a bit more challenging, and that's why you need the right abilities for the job. In later Kirby games, there's usually specific abilities for specific puzzles, but here, the simple fun comes from switching between abilities whenever you like, and trying them all out. That is an element in later Kirby games alongside the puzzles, and I do think that makes Adventure a bit weaker design-wise. However, it's fun in its own way. Kirby's Adventure is not only one of the most fun Kirby games, but probably the one that innovated the most, which is definitely why you can see Adventure DNA in loads of future Kirby games, especially Return to Dreamland and Squeak Squad. Go play this one if you haven't already. It's actually a great series entry point. There is one problem, however, the slowdown. NES games have this fun thing where they start going at 2 frames per second. It's probably one of my biggest problems with the system. In this case, though, there is a solution. 3D Classics Kirby's Adventure completely removes the slowdown. The game is fully playable on Switch where you can get it free with NSO, but the 3DS version is definitely the definitive version. If you're interested enough to pay the extra $6, go for it. You could also play the GBA remake, and while I personally enjoy the NES version more, mostly due to personal biases, I can't deny that Nightmare in Dreamland is also an incredible time. No matter what way you play it, Kirby's Adventure is worth a try, especially for those who are trying to get into the Kirby series. Mech Fight is the best NES game, and it isn't even on the NES. It instead only released on the Japanese equivalent to the NES, the Famicom. Regardless, this is the best game on the system. This is a great example of the other type of simplistic complexity. It takes the incredibly complex fighting game genre and its several button inputs needed for combos, and turns it into something a lot more basic. Usual fighting games of the time used 6 buttons, but Mech Fight had to work with the NES controller. This means you only have 2 buttons, a D-pad, and 4 specials within those combinations. There are some quarter circles and half circles, but other than those, this is very comparable to something like Smash Bros. You have your air attacks, your grabs and throws, and so on. But instead of being restricted by its button limit, Mech Fight excels from it. The exact same thing goes for the character designs. The Famicom can't render very large sprites, so they just slap several together. This makes some pretty unique character designs, and well-designed ones at that. This game is pretty complex for the NES, coming close to pushing the system to its limits, and yet, it practically has no lag. Along with that, this game has 36 playable characters, the most of any fighting game at the time. While some moves are reused throughout all of them, they are mostly all diverse enough to feel unique, especially because all the character designs are a joy. This game really does it all in my opinion. It shows Nintendo's charm in droves, the character designs are some of the best the Famicom has got, not to mention some of Nintendo's best in general. The game controls great for the system, along with having incredibly fun multiplayer, and it's very easy to pick up. The only issue? Accessibility. It never released in the US, so if you want to play it easily, you'll have to download Famicom NSO. However, this isn't too troublesome, and it is 100% worth it for this game alone. Mech Fight isn't only a hidden gem, I'd go as far to say it's a masterpiece. Despite the simplistic enjoyment of Excitebike, or the love and incredible concepts brought upon by Kirby's Adventure, or even the amazing things Mech Fight does, nothing can compare or show simplistic complexity better than the game that started it all. It was a game so good that it pretty much single-handedly stopped the console crash and showed that games could be a lot more than they used to be, but also that Nintendo meant business. It needs no introduction, and I've already given it enough of one, so let's get into Super Mario Bros. It's hard to know where to start with this one. Every moment here is incredibly iconic in its own right. In fact, I can't say I have any complaints. Super Mario Bros. Is a near-perfect game in every capacity, and that's simply because there isn't really much fat to this one. It's cut down to nothing but the core gameplay of running and jumping. And that core gameplay? It's really fun. That's what makes it a great example of simplistic complexity. Despite it having so little to it, they do so much with the concept. There's so many enemies and hazards in Mario 1, especially by 1985 standards, and your only way around them is to run and jump. They take what a platformer was at the time and run wild with it. There are few games that are as influential and innovative as Mario 1 that hold up this well today. Super Mario Bros. Even holds up more compared to its counterpart, the original Legend of Zelda. That game is also innovative and holds up today in many ways, however, you can't say it hasn't aged. The game is practically unplayable without a guide, which really isn't a bad thing considering I love Dreamland Free, another game that does that. But in both cases, the games start to fall out of the philosophy of simplistic complexity. This is simply because neither game does a great job at guiding the player, making it a lot less simple. Super Mario Bros., on the other hand, both innovated, but at the same time knew its system's limits and what worked. While Zelda definitely does that, it's in no way to the same degree. Super Mario Bros. Is a fun and iconic game in every way. If you haven't played it, there is literally nothing stopping you. This game is playable on practically every Nintendo system, so if you haven't played it, you have no excuse not to. Out of all games on the NES, well, not even being close to my favorite, I can say it's the one that comes closest to perfection. Hell, it's even more perfect than Super Mario Bros. Free, a game I like miles more for separate reasons. Go play Super Mario Bros. 1 if you haven't already. It's great fun and you won't regret it. If you've already beaten it, play it again! This game is an infinitely replayable masterpiece. Overall, the NES still isn't the best thing out there, especially compared to Nintendo's greats like the Switch, Super Nintendo, GBA, and 3DS. But I really have to respect it for several reasons. Its concept of simplistic complexity slowly evolved into a big part of what we now know as Nintendo's charm. Their continued design philosophy of taking ideas and running a mile with them, while still focusing on the core gameplay to make something amazing, with great style to boot. If you think about it that way, Super Mario Bros. Isn't really that far off from Super Mario Odyssey. And without the foundation of the former, Odyssey wouldn't be all too great. It's not only Nintendo titles that took inspiration from the ideas of simplistic complexity either. Let's talk about two of my favorite games of all time, that were both released as recently as a couple years ago, that still show ideas of simplistic complexity. The Sonic series isn't really one always associated with simplicity. Over its 30-year history, we've had a lot of games, many of which had several characters to extend the length of the game with multiple gameplay styles. This is the exact opposite of simplistic complexity, as it throws loads of concepts at the wall just to see what sticks. Sometimes this works out, but other times not so much. However, when Sonic nails the idea of simplistic complexity, he really nails it. And that's what makes Sonic Mania so great. 2D Sonic definitely started out applying similar design philosophies to Mario. The series was literally inspired by Yuji Naka's speedrunning through 1-1 in Super Mario Bros. But Sonic Mania is where these ideas truly hit their stride. This game takes the simple concept of rolling around at the speed of sound and takes it to the moon and back, with fun stage elements that both hinder and help you. Sonic Mania takes classic level concepts and puts them into a wonderful new engine with a few changes, alongside going wild with old level concepts, making ones that people used to be pretty on feel great. The best example of this is Sonic CD's Metallic Madness, a stage which, like many of CD's stages, was initially frowned upon, but here it's super fun. There's also some brand new stages which really take things to another level. I love all 4 of them. In that comes the game's biggest fault, however. There isn't enough new stuff. This wasn't much of an issue for me, but many people going into this had already played Sonic 1 for free and CD, and Knuckles, so they'd seen all these stages. The saddest part is we may never see something like Sonic Mania again due to the fact that many developers who worked on it moved on for several reasons. Either way, I love this game, and if you haven't played it already, give it a try. Superliminal is my favorite game of all time. It may be short, and it may have some flaws, but at the end of the day, those are outweighed immensely by this game's charm and the simple fun of the gameplay. This game is one of the best modern examples of simplistic complexity. Everything here is centered around the simple mechanic of perspective-based puzzles, but they go so many places with this idea. From quite literally taking the moon to using portals to change your size, there's a lot of ways they take this simple mechanic and build it into something incredibly complex. The coolest part is once you get a handle on the mechanics, this game is both incredibly easy to replay and speedrun. The game only takes 30 minutes to beat if you're fast, and it cleverly gives you an achievement for doing such, inspiring the player to try to beat the game as fast as they can. On the complete inverse end, they were smart enough to hide loads of hidden areas and collectibles for those who decide to go off the beaten path or think outside the box. I didn't even know many of these were here until my 5th or 6th playthrough. Some things about this game are so complex that it had me looking at real life at a different perspective. One just like the game. And that's both literal and figurative for some other reasons. Alongside everything else this game does, it manages to have an amazing message at the end. It's something I won't spoil because it's best shown if you play the game for yourself, but trust me when I say it's an amazing message and one that works so well for the title. Superliminal shows the concepts of simplistic complexity and malleable game design really well, which is beautifully fitting for a game about different perspectives. No matter what way I look at it, it's hard for me to hate this game, and if it weren't obvious, I think you should play it as well. The NES is a foundation for a great company and their amazing future. It established so many IPs with sometimes aged but still incredibly fun experiences. Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Kid Icarus, they all have their big starts here, along with so many others. The NES and its foundation of Nintendo's philosophy also just shows what I really love about Nintendo games in the first place. Simplistic complexity really makes for great design. It's pretty important to have a central focus for your game, and by not deviating from that core, and instead expanding upon it, games that use simplistic complexity almost always turn out at least a little fun. What's really great is when you take the idea of simplistic complexity and tie it to not only every gameplay element, but every other part as well. Not many games do this, especially NES games, but Superliminal is able to keep things simple and thematically tie everything around its concept, which is part of why I think it's the peak of simplistic complexity, and why it's my favorite game of all time. Simplistic complexity is somehow able to make things that you wouldn't really expect to be enjoyable super fun, and is applied in many of the greatest games of all time, both Nintendo and non-Nintendo. When you're able to keep focus with your core ideas for a game, you're always going to have that backbone to lean on, and simplistic complexity is designed around that idea. When you start throwing a bunch of ideas at the wall to see what sticks, instead of focusing on the one that really works, your game could end up bloated, or end up being incomplete due to budget or time constraints. That's why a game like 3D World worked, but Balance simply doesn't. Your main focus should come first before the ideas that go around it. Simplistic complexity is a philosophy that takes that idea to heart, and that's why it works so often. This is what I love about the philosophy, and about Nintendo games in general. Another thing about the NES is it's just so charming, especially Nintendo's output. Every game here has a distinct style that, while aged, looks really nice. Part of that is likely due to the fact that these graphics hold a lot of meaning nowadays for everything they represent, but at the time they were pretty good graphics for a home console. And even looking at them separate from their legacy, these sprites have so much charm to them. This charm later evolved into a Nintendo trademark, and part of what makes so many people love them today. The NES established a great design philosophy, and has loads of great games that still hold up today and are charming as heck while they're at it. I think it at least deserves respect for that. I guess what I'm trying to say with all this is, maybe Clu Clu Land isn't that bad after all. I'll see you all next time. Sorry, I have to get this. Hello?
Did you just make an NES video without mentioning Mega Man?
Yes.